Welcome to Lesson 2 of Unit 8 on factoring trinomials. In this lesson, we will learn how to factor quadratic trinomials where the leading coefficient is equal to 1. So remember, the leading coefficient is the number in front of the term with the highest degree. So for our purposes, we are only looking at quadratic equations. So we're looking at the quadratic term, or the term that has the x squared, and that coefficient will always be 1. So we've talked about using FOIL, and remember that when we multiply two binomials together, we end up with a trinomial. There's one exception to that. So if you think about that, maybe you could bring that answer to class. See if you can come up with the answer to that question. We're going to be using FOIL to multiply our binomials. So here I have two binomials, and I want you to think about the first term in our trinomial comes from multiplying the first terms in the binomial. Then the last term in the trinomial comes from multiplying the two last terms in the binomial. And then our middle term comes from the outer and inner terms in our binomials. So that's where the trinomial comes from. Remember, it's the first, outer, inner, last. So we're going to be working backwards. We're going to start with the trinomial and see if we can come up with the two binomials. And this will seem very confusing as I talk through this, but once we get to our last two slides, this should all come together and make more sense. So our goal, remember, is to change the trinomial into two binomial factors. Okay, remember, factors are things that are multiplied together to give you a different number or a different expression. For example, here we have a trinomial, and we can break that down by factoring into two binomials. So we're going to start by learning some sign rules. We will be starting with the constant term, which is the term that does not have a variable with it, and we're going to be using that term to find the last terms in the binomial factors. So if this is my trinomial, we are going to find factors of c that either add to, if this is a plus sign, they will add to b, which is the middle term coefficient, or the linear term. So factors of c that add to b, or in this case of the trinomial down below here, we would want factors of c that differ by b. So if the sign is a plus, we are going to find factors that add to this middle term. If this sign is a minus, we will find factors that subtract to give us this term. For example, here's a couple of examples down at the bottom. Using the same example I had from the other page, we would want factors of 10 that add to 7. Over on the right-hand side, we would want factors of 10 that differ by 3. Okay? So once we know the factors, we're going to use the second sign. So we have one sign here and a second sign here. So the second sign is the one we're looking at for our sign rules right now. That second sign will tell us if the factor signs are the same or if they are different. Now, if it's a plus sign, if this is second sign is a plus sign, that tells us that our binomial factors are both the same sign. They're either both plus or they're both minus. So when this is a plus, we have both pluses or both minuses, and the first sign tells us what they are. Okay? So if this second sign is a minus, that tells us that the factor signs are different. One of them is plus and one of them is minus. So here are some more sign rules. It says determine the signs of the factors using the first sign. So the first sign will tell us what the factor signs are. Remember, the second sign tells us that the factor signs are either the same or they are different. And then the first sign tells us what they are. So in this case, the factor signs would be the same. They would both be plus. In the second scenario, the factor signs are the same, but they're both minus. And in the third scenario, the factor signs are different. We have one of each. And in the case of when we have different signs, the larger factor gets the plus sign. So here's a summary of how to do factoring, and then we'll do some examples. We first want to find the factors by looking at our constant term. Then we're going to determine the signs of the factors, if they're same or different, and then we'll write the binomial factors with their correct signs. So at last, let's do some examples and practice a new skill. So here we go. So our first one is x squared plus 4x plus 3. Remember, all of these we're going to be writing as two binomial factors, so you can start by writing your parentheses. And your first terms in your factors come from your first term of your trinomial. So the only way to get an x squared is by multiplying x times x. That's where our x squared comes from. Then our last terms, okay, remember the last terms are here and here. And those come from factors of 3 that add to 4. So what are the factors of 3? Well, there are only two factors, 1 and 3. And those two factors, indeed, if you add them, give you 4. So one of our factors is 1 and one of our factors is 3. Now we have to determine what the signs of each of those factors is. So let's take a look at that. The signs of our factors are determined by, first of all, looking at the second sign. This tells us that the factors are the same sign. Both of these have the same sign. This tells us that they are both plus. So plus and plus. So this is the factored form of this trinomial. If we were to use FOIL and multiply these two binomials together, we would get right back to where we started from with the binomial x squared plus 4x plus 3. All right, let's try some more examples. Over here on the right-hand side for actually I think what I'll do is I'll work through the odd problems and I'll have you practice the even problems on your own and bring those to class. So let's move on down to number 3. Remember, our first terms come from our first term, x and x, and then we want factors of 6 that add to 7. Well, the factors of 6 are either 1 and 6 or 2 and 3. Well, which pair, when we add them together give us 7? Well, that's 1 and 6, so we're going to use a 1 and a 6. This tells us that the factor signs are the same, and this tells us what the factor signs are. They are both minus. On number 5, moving on through, our first signs come from, or our first factors come from x squared. The only way to get an x squared is to use an x and an x. And then our second thing that we want to do is use our constant term to determine what factors we're using. Factors of 12, right, that add to 7. So the factors of 12, there are many. We could do 1 and 12, 2 and 6, or 3 and 4. Those are all the factors of 12. Now, which of those pairs add to 7? Well, there's only one pair, and that's 3 and 4. So put 3 in one spot, 4 in another, and it doesn't matter which is where. This tells us the signs of the factors are the same, and they are both plus. So there you have it. You can always check your work by doing FOIL. All right, here's some more practice. Again, I'll do the odd-numbered problems, and you can bring the even-numbered problems to class. So we're going to factor completely. This time, we're going to work on having our second sign be negative. So again, our first terms come from x squared, which have to be x and x. Factors of 3 that differ by 2. Our factors of 3 are 1 and 3, right? And so do they subtract to give us 2? And they do. So 1 is a 1, 1 is a 3. Our signs are different this time, so we have a plus and a minus. But how do we know which one's where? Well, this tells us the sign of the bigger factor. So 3 is bigger than 1. It gets the plus sign, and this gets the minus sign. So when you do your outer and your inner, you'll see you get plus 3x and minus 1x, which gives you the plus 2x. Number 3, first starting with our parentheses, our first terms are x and x. We want factors of 6 that differ by 1. Okay, so we have 1 and 6, or 2 and 3. So which pair, when you subtract them, give you a 1? Well, that has to be the 2 and the 3. So write a 2 and a 3 in those positions. The signs are different. The bigger sign is the same as this first sign. 3 is bigger, so it gets the plus. 3 gets the minus, and 2 gets the plus. So this tells us the signs are different. This tells us the sign of the bigger factor. And my last one here for you, number 5. First terms, x and x. This time we want factors of 12 that differ by 4. Again, 1 and 12, 2 and 6, or 3 and 4 are our options. Those are all the factors of 12. We want the factors that subtract and give us 4. Well, when we subtract these two, we get 11. This one gives us 4, and this one gives us 1. So we wanted the ones that give us 4. So we're going to write a 2 and a 6. Now one of these is plus and one is minus. Since this is a minus, the one that's plus is the bigger one. 6 is bigger, it gets the plus sign, 2 gets the minus sign. That is it for this video. Have fun factoring. See you in class.